Today we are going to talk a little bit about Confucius. It seems that the photograph of Confucius currently displayed on our screen actually looks just like a Tibetan villager. Honestly, it really does not look like Confucius. That's not him. Just now I actually saw that dark-skinned one over there. Today we'll continue our discussion of Confucius's Analects. In the noted Analects of Confucius, we are now talking about the third chapter, Yi Pian, in this section. As for the Yi Pian, the verses that appeared at the end of that day, I'm not sure if I covered them at the time. Mainly, when we typically talk about the Analects, sometimes we need to carefully look at the historical context of that time. If we don't consider that at this point, and just look at, as an illustration, how he mentions that the Son of Heaven has 8 rows of dancers. Feudal rulers could have 6 lines of dancers in their grand rituals, but those who possessed immense wealth were limited to just 4 lines, highlighting the hierarchy and social distinctions. This kind of hierarchy and ranking, when we look at it from the perspective of today's society, in modern times, it doesn't really connect with us or resonate emotionally with us. We need to understand that when we study the Analects now, we ourselves should try, if possible, to travel back in time, if we could travel back more than 2,500 years, so that we can better understand things as if we were people truly living in that era. Confucius, in that special historical context, was just a person living in the world at that time, and he had some dissatisfaction and discontentment and emotions about the society of his time, or, relying on the phenomena of his time, he confidently proclaimed a certain truth. But when we look at it today, some things, although on the surface, they don't directly mention our lives today, but in fact in terms of meaning, it seems that many things can be analogized from them in a variety of ways. What he said still makes sense. That's how we should put it. So, as for this passage, it's mainly about the relationships between social classes at that time. There were different ranks among the classes, actually. For example, in India, there were also royal families and Brahmins, or lower and different classes. So, in the Han region at that time, there were also various ranks and distinctions among people. These ranks represented different levels of status and importance within society. Among these ranks, the most important at the time was what we often refer to as the sovereign of all under heaven. As for the sovereign of all under heaven, the entire realm was under the control of the Son of Heaven alone. The Son of Heaven was the highest king. Below the Son of Heaven were the many feudal states, and at that time there were quite a few of them, including states like Lu, Qin, Yan, and many others, for instance. Actually, as for these states, they had a significant degree of autonomy, including their own independent armies, laws, and rituals. Many different aspects of the process were highly autonomous in nature. It's similar to the United States today, where each state, with its 50 states, each state has its own unique style, and they are completely different from one another. Some states are even completely opposed to the president, yet they can still exist this way. But in some other countries, if you oppose the president, you might not even really have the space to survive. But back then, in general, it was the Son of Heaven who ruled the entire realm, overseeing the land and its people. And beneath him were the various feudal states. But each feudal lord, they had their own highly developed culture, autonomy, and various laws, and all sorts of legal systems, etc. But overall, the Son of Heaven governed the entire realm, while the presidents of these small feudal states, just like powerful national leaders, they also had many incredibly wealthy and influential people serving under them. This indeed was the significant historical context during Confucius's influential time. Was actually the spring and autumn period, which lasted for approximately 300 years. When Confucius appeared, it was the Warring States period, and the entire spring and autumn and Warring States era was nearing its end. The Warring States period itself lasted for a little over 200 years. At this time, many of the phenomena Confucius observed were already different from the original rules and customs. Originally, the Son of Heaven had his own special significance, including when he went out. Whether it was his music or his army, his entire entourage is subject to the absolute highest level of official protocol requirements, and then, of course, there are also the medium-level ones just below that. Then the lower ranks, and then the very lowest ranks. Such was the established hierarchy, and such indeed were the rules. But by the time of Confucius, basically, the rules for the Son of Heaven from earlier times had gradually started to change. At that time, Confucius faced this kind of situation. It's like what we often call the end of the Dharma era. Many old practitioners would think, it wasn't like this when we were young, but now things are getting worse and worse. So naturally, Confucius had a certain, regarding the history of his time, briefly, and especially about the feudal states below, and the behavior of some of the very wealthy and powerful people. It seems to go against the previous rules. They often talk about what they call the collapse of rights and the ruin of music, meaning that their important social rituals have already completely fallen apart, and cultural expressions such as things like music have already been utterly destroyed. The entire excellent traditional culture from before was gradually being lost. At this moment, Confucius felt a kind of sorrow in his heart, so he explained these ideas directly in different classes, sharing his thoughts and feelings with everyone present. He would also speak quite openly and honestly to different people. So, in general, what kind of personality did Confucius have? He was like some of the Khenpos in our academy today. As soon as he saw something unreasonable, he would speak up and share his thoughts directly. No matter what your status was, he would use a sharp and incisive wisdom to speak out directly. This was one of his most notable characteristics. He would never simply be a yes man, just agreeing with everything that was said. He also mentioned this later on. People who are completely indifferent and ignore everything around them are thieves of virtue. If you see something and just don't care, this kind of person is really not good. Even though they may appear to be good in front of others and people might think this person is very nice, he would say nothing bad about anyone. People tend to think that's a good thing. But in fact, in Confucius' eyes, he couldn't stand this kind of behavior. As long as something was not in line with morality, not in line with ethics, or not in line with the law, he would point out such phenomena directly. After carefully pointing them out, he would begin to correct them. This was one of his characteristics. So, at that time, in the era when Confucius lived, and under such a historical background, some of the phenomena he carefully observed were, indeed, perhaps not very optimistic. It was at this time that he spoke out about these things. Earlier, it was also mentioned to perform the 8-row dance in the courtyard. If this can be tolerated, what cannot be tolerated? He said, if even this you can tolerate, then there is nothing in this world that cannot be tolerated. When he saw this kind of phenomenon, he felt deeply pained by it. We also have some related content coming up, and if we don't really understand these principles, we might not be able to figure out what he's actually thinking or what his ideas are behind those actions. This is actually quite important. Now let's continue with the next part of our discussion. The 3 families performed the yong to conclude the ceremony. Confucius once said, the verse runs, "In attendance were the feudal lords. The Son of Heaven sat gravely on his throne." Why should this be performed in the halls of the 3 families? Here, the 3 families refers to what seemed to be the Meng, Shu, and Ji families at the time. There were 3 particularly wealthy and powerful clans, each of which held a significant position in society. At that time, within the state of Lu, these 3 families were regarded as quite remarkable. They were the major wealthy and influential households, so to speak. And as for these 3, in fact, it was these 3 who performed certain important rituals. What kind of rituals did they perform? At the time, perhaps when some of their relatives passed away after their deaths, they themselves would hold ceremonies of a very high standard, using the same standards as those for the Son of Heaven. When they first held funeral ceremonies, they were also extremely grand and elaborate. In the end, when all the seats and preparations and arrangements were carefully taken down at the time of dismantling everything, they played a piece called Yong. It was a piece of music from the Yong poem. Although the actual lyrics of this piece of music are actually the words, "In attendance were the feudal lords. The Son of Heaven sat gravely on his throne." At that time he was feeling a bit unhappy, so he just mentioned it briefly, without going into much detail or expressing too many emotions about it. He simply said it in passing, and did not say that what they did was too much, or that it wasn't done this way in the past, or that you don't have the qualifications. He didn't say anything like that. He used a very tactful tone and then hinted perhaps in a subtle and indirect way that their way of doing things had already violated the proper rituals. So what exactly did they violate? Because Yong, which seems to be a poem from the Book of Songs, an ancient Chinese classic mainly, within it, he quoted from it the word che, here referring to taking things down, remove the seats, take away the podium, and gradually clear away all those ceremonial arrangements and ritual seats, dismantling everything step by step from the stage until nothing remains of the ritual setup. Just like when we organize an event with a lot of people. After the event is over, all the stages, as well as the various surrounding setups and arrangements, all the platforms and displays that need to be taken down, are all removed one by one. At this time, they would play this music. So what does this music mean? The phrase "xiang wei bigong," what does it mean? It means that the feudal lords, who were the kings or rulers of the feudal states, would come together to help. But what were they helping with? They were coming to assist with the inspection, which was an important event where the central authority would review the states. This act showed their support and cooperation, or in other words, to observe the sacrificial ceremony. At this time, the emperor's conduct and appearance were extremely solemn, as they should be. For example, if there were people from 4 feudal states who were preparing to assist the emperor, if something happened at home, let us say, and they were holding a sacrificial ceremony, when conducting the ceremony, they would come to help him. But in the process of helping him, what would be displayed? It would show that in fact the emperor was especially dignified, solemn and grave. He was very serious, grave and solemn in his demeanor. This kind of image, this means that in this context, it actually seems rather simple overall. They played this kind of music, and they also played this kind of memorable, beautiful melody. There are many examples like this, so how could it be that in the ancestral halls of your 3 families, perhaps this is appropriate? While you're clearing the tables right now, does it really make sense for you to play music like this, or to express such a pleasant mood in this way? Is it actually appropriate behavior in this situation, or is there something unreasonable about doing so? It's just like nowadays. For example, someone from a small rural village, he starts holding his own military parade, doing all sorts of things by himself. In that case, the scale might be just a little bit, including him participating himself in it, acting as some kind of monarch. Not long ago there was a news story saying that there was an old man, over 80 years old, who claimed he came from the very top, a very high-ranking officer, dressed up completely and fully from head to toe, looking as if he was very dignified. Then he just began doing this for some reason. I don't know if he ended up getting caught or not. Some people just really don't know their own place at all. That's for those 3 families, actually. They did not even have the official status of a feudal lord, yet they used the sacred ceremonial rituals of the supreme ruler, the Son of Heaven, setting up musical instruments and holding all kinds of lavish events as if they were, in fact, royalty. They insisted on doing things simply according to the standards of the Son of Heaven. If you do things like that, in fact, this kind of behavior maybe in our society today, there might not even be such a class anymore, actually, including what we talked about earlier. No matter which country it is, there's always a highest level of government. Then below that are provinces, states, counties, and villages, including, for example, townships and villages, step by step down the hierarchy. So in this case, even a wealthy or influential person in a small village, perhaps, if he holds the highest political position there, if he displays this kind of behavior, especially in these situations, it's really, truly unreasonable. Of course, and when it comes to organizing events and such, on one hand, we might not even have the space for it. And on the other hand, we might not even want to do it. But sometimes it really does happen. Nowadays, a lot of our institutions, including some colleges, for example, actually don't have much of an international presence, sometimes not even in just 2 or 3 countries, but they still call themselves things like International Hospital, International Nursing Home, International Medical College, and so on. And the leaders in these places, including well-known so-called international experts, nowadays, in order to attract people's attention, the people inside are actually still really quite ordinary and unremarkable, just average people, but their titles are extremely high-sounding. Now, there are also many such cases in the world, including our medicines and all kinds of products which may look quite simple on the surface, and the quality inside is completely and absolutely the same in value, but on the outside they are made to look much more high-end with very fancy and elaborate packaging. If that's the case, then in reality the facts don't match the name or appearance. This is something we shouldn't do. For example, within our Buddhist communities, it sometimes happens that certain individuals do not in fact possess the official title of Geshe or Khenpo, but they will go on to call themselves Khenpo anyway, regardless, and then start forging some certificates. We ourselves are not Dharma kings. But like in the past when it came to Dharma kings, there was a scholar who said that so-called Dharma kings were appointed by the highest leaders of the country in the past. But as for today's Dharma kings, I'm not really sure either. Some people say this and that about certain individuals, but indeed, some of the criticisms are reasonable, while some criticisms may not necessarily be valid. We do not know which venerable or great master conferred the title, so it is hard to say. So for some of us, we ourselves are just, perhaps just regardless of whether it's in terms of scholarship or knowledge, or even our own level of spiritual attainment. Many are called Dharma kings in this tradition. Speaking of Dharma kings, in the past within Tibetan Buddhism, there was a particularly flourishing era of Dharma kings. For a period in the middle, there were this Dharma king and that Dharma king everywhere. By the time it got to the later period, as long as it was within a monastery or a particular sect, they would also be called Dharma king. But in these cases, one should judge for oneself. Otherwise, if you go around promoting yourself like this, whether it's good or not is also hard to say. Nowadays, in big cities, there are also many university lecturers and academicians. Strictly speaking, the highest level of academician is not that easy to attain. Academicians from some universities or real academies of sciences, these are not so simple to become. But in many cases, some hospitals, some older doctors with a bit more seniority, also take on the title of academician or are invited as such and such academician. This kind of phenomenon is quite common. So in these kinds of situations, for us as individuals, we should always make sure that our titles and identities truly match who we really are. It's very important to be aware of this ourselves. And the things we choose to do in our lives should also be exceptionally well suited to your own profound inner knowledge and your unique inherent qualifications, meaning it is vital that they are completely and totally aligned. This is really quite necessary. So when we take a closer look at this, Confucius, at least on the surface, was actually hinting at something indirectly, saying to the 3 families, is it really necessary for you to hold such grand ceremonies and play fine music? Is this really needed? In reality, they were going a bit overboard. They actually didn't have the qualifications for this at all, yet they still went ahead and started holding these events by overstepping their bounds. This in a way shows that Confucius was somewhat dissatisfied with society at the time. It's similar to how Lu Xun felt back then, being dissatisfied with many aspects of society at that time. So whether it's in the true story of RQ or in many of his written essays, his words were often quite sharp and direct. Including his comments about Confucius, he was also referring to some powerful people at the time who packaged him as a sage, a wise figure, to achieve their own personal objectives. But in fact, they didn't actually care about him at all. This is also mentioned in some of Lu Xun's books, where he says similar things. But he was also basing this on the actually cultural or political systems of the time. There is indeed a certain undeniable connection, so it seems that in any given era, sometimes what they say is genuinely sincere, truly spoken as a direct response to the various social phenomena of that particular time. Other times it might be more forced, and in such situations they have no choice but to speak. If they don't speak in a certain sense, they may also face certain punishments. This is something we can still see today. whether it's Buddhists or when it comes to other people's words, what you hear may actually be their genuine and sincere inner thoughts, which they choose to express openly through language. However, there are cases when, if they hadn't said it like that, in a certain sense, they will encounter certain difficulties. So under the pressure of a particular culture or system, under this kind of coercion or influence, they end up saying these things themselves. Therefore, when we look at other people's words or some of their actions, we shouldn't generalize. We should carefully consider the reasons behind them. If you truly take a moment to reflect on it, the reasons and motives behind their actions, only then do you begin to realize why this person said what they did, or that it is closely connected to a particular historical background. In this regard, personally speaking, I think many of the customs from the Buddha's time, many of the rules, are still relatively easy to explain today. Otherwise, if you look at people today, even explaining some things from 200 years ago can be very difficult, let alone things from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. There will definitely be cultural barriers when we talk about them. So sometimes when we are learning about these things, we should try to immerse ourselves in the life of the past and imagine for ourselves as if we had become a disciple of Confucius or someone of equal standing to Confucius, and consider whether we could understand his words. But perhaps at that time what they said was something else entirely. Otherwise, even these texts, they themselves might not have understood them either if you didn't read the annotations, if you didn't try to explain them, if you just read them as they are. Probably no one would understand. By comparison, in our Buddhist scriptures, these cases and these principles, as soon as we read them, we can basically understand them right away. So as for other ancient texts and cultures, there really are certain difficulties. But at that time when they spoke, they probably used more straightforward and easy to understand colloquial spoken language. But when it came to writing, because in ancient times, it seems that they focused on literary style. If the writing style was more symmetrical and therefore harder to understand overall, they considered it to be very good. For us, if we're not studying poetry, when we write poems, in the past there were many talented poets, and the more obscure their embellishments were, the more they thought it was excellent. But nowadays, the easier it is to understand, the more people think that's the best writing style. It is certainly true that there can be such differences in perspective. To illustrate this, the text then presents a famous quote from the philosopher Confucius, where he said, "If a person lacks benevolence, what use is ritual to him? If a person lacks benevolence, what use is music to him?" This is a sentiment that Confucius himself also expressed. He asked, if a person is fundamentally lacking in the virtue of benevolence or true kindness, then what is the real purpose or value of following the rules of etiquette? Because if he lacks such inner benevolence, what good are outward rituals, really? So people must truly have benevolence. If there is no benevolence, then what is the ultimate purpose of this kind of music? The answer seems quite straightforward, right? It's that people need to possess benevolence and virtue, because if they don't, rituals are useless too. People need benevolence, and if they don't have it, then all music and such are truly useless as well in this context. This is essentially the principle behind it. But here, this concept of Ren, benevolence, actually throughout Confucius's Analects, the Analects has about 20,000 characters, I think, and it seems that the word Ren appears about 109 times or so. This is quite significant. So benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom and trustworthiness. In Confucian culture, the concept of Ren is quite broad. There are comprehensive explanations for Ren as well. The explanation is as follows: respectfulness, tolerance, trustworthiness, diligence, and kindness. There are about 5 words: trustworthiness, diligence, and kindness. 5 words: Gong as in respectful, Quan as in tolerant, Zin as in trustworthy, Min as in sharp or diligent, and then Hui as in kind. There are several words specifically used to explain Ren. The scope of Ren is very broad. Nowadays, for many of us, including in English or Tibetan, when translating it's probably impossible to fully capture it. We can only translate it as benevolence or compassion. But if we use benevolence to explain it, the scope might actually be a bit narrower or really more limited, because this virtue of Ren is not only about kindness and altruism, It also includes moral character and personal qualities, and so on. There are many different meanings contained within it. It includes, in particular, tolerance, altruism, respectfulness, trustworthiness. But the most important thing is indeed truly sincerity. Sincerity is the essence of Ren. So when we try to explain Ren using the languages of other ethnic groups nowadays, none of them really capture it well. In the past, I've also personally asked people from other countries about this as well, just to hear their thoughts. I asked them regarding the character Ren in Confucian culture, how exactly do you interpret it? They each have their own explanations. However, as for its truly profound and deeper meaning, I'm afraid it's still very hard to grasp. As for the character Ren, if we look at its form in ancient oracle bone script in Chinese, the character Ren combines the radical for person with the number 2. This means that Ren actually involves two people. There is mutual kindness and benevolence between them. Only then can it truly stand firm. If it's just one person, he is alone, and he can't really truly love anyone else. But if there are two or more people, they can establish the true meaning of benevolence between each other. This is one way of explaining it. So, as a person, one must possess this kind of virtue of Ren. If it's just kindness alone, it might not necessarily encompass everything within it. Within Ren, there are aspects of the mind as well as aspects of behavior. Generally speaking, we talk about the 3 gates: body, speech, and mind. Actually, when it comes to Ren, the virtues of body, speech, and mind, the qualities of body, speech, and mind, a person who truly possesses all of these qualities must have a sincere heart and actions. If one does not possess these, what use is there in having only li, propriety or ritual? If we look at li in the narrow sense, it specifically refers to etiquette, ceremonial manners, and dignified conduct. But if we consider its broader meaning, li includes external rituals and etiquette, as well as systems and rules. All of these are included within the concept of li. So the Confucian concept of li, nowadays many people think that, for example, if you are a service worker, it's about how you carry out ceremonial actions and your outward appearance. But in fact, it's not just about appearances. It also includes the system, one's actions, the content of norms, and so on, such as all of these are included. So what this means is that if a person is completely lacking in genuine morality and benevolence, then merely having external systems, laws, and rituals, really, what use are these? They are of no real use. This is the first layer of meaning. This Ren, benevolence, is very important. If there is no benevolence, then all external behaviors can be changed at will. In fact, some of Confucius's ideas and those of the Buddha may differ when it comes to past and future lives, including the ultimate truth and conventional truth. In this regard, Confucius may not have made such distinctions. However, in some manifestations within our secular world, Confucius also emphasized and valued our inner mind. External behavior is often just an illusion, empty and hypocritical. It's not necessarily authentic. So if my heart lacks sincerity, then these external systems and rituals, what use are they in the end? They're really not very important. This is also true in our everyday world. For example, in many schools, students are generally required to bow politely whenever they see a teacher, or to greet them verbally in a respectful manner, such as by saying, "Hello, teacher." Many universities have such practices now. When they see them on the road, they always say that they have to bow respectfully and say, "Hello, teacher." But for many students, they actually feel dissatisfied with the teacher in their hearts, and their whole expression quite clearly shows clear discontent. But because they're bound by the rules, they just slightly bow and say, "Hello, teacher," but in a tone that is clearly full of dissatisfaction. Their heart and their actions are completely out of sync with each other. What Confucius meant was, if you don't have sincerity in your heart, even if you show respect on the surface. Sometimes as people, including among Buddhists, it's the same way. If in your heart you don't have respect for the 3 jewels, as Patrul Rinpoche also said in The Words of My Perfect Teacher, if you don't have genuine respect for the 3 jewels in your heart, then merely bowing or prostrating physically on the outside has no merit at all. What I just mentioned is also discussed in Words of My Perfect Teacher. If there is no sense of reverence, if the mind does not hold reverence for the three jewels, then, in fact, outward physical acts of respect, such as prostrations, are actually meaningless. This is somewhat similar to the idea here. If a person lacks benevolence and compassion, then in this context, when we talk about music, on the surface, it may seem like we're just talking about music, the music that we play. But in fact, the word music here also encompasses culture and the arts, such as music. The meaning of music in ancient times was not just limited to the word music or to musical sounds. It included many aspects of culture and imagery. Nowadays we have things like movies and television, and all of these represent culture. These are important symbols of the various arts, so all of these are included here. Therefore, if a person truly lacks benevolence, then no matter if you play music on the outside, or dance or sing, these too are meaningless. Including many artistic activities, they are also meaningless. What you should have internally is, for example, having faith in the three jewels and truly having some recitation practices in your heart is acceptable. But if you don't have this, then in the various rituals held in monasteries, such as beating drums and striking gongs, all kinds of ceremonies, they may appear to be rituals. They may appear to be very solemn and especially dignified, or seem particularly special in this way, presenting an outward impression of importance. However, in reality, they actually lack much inner value or true substance. So, just as we often say in Buddhism, the mind is very important. In the past, for example, 3 people might circumambulate a stupa. It's very likely that one has a virtuous mind, another a non-virtuous mind, and another a neutral mind. If one person does it with a truly virtuous mind, reciting the Buddha's name while circumambulating, there is considerable merit and virtue in that. If another person does it to hide after committing theft and circumambulates the stupa for that reason, there is no merit in it. If another person with a neutral mind circumambulates the stupa just to avoid the rain or to cool off, then although the physical action is the same and has the same merit, but this is not what's important. What really matters more is to look at the intention behind it, whether the mind is virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral in its nature. So what he means by benevolence is that many of these cultural practices, these external phenomena, are actually really not that important. It's not like the current professional training where hotel and restaurant staff are required to always wear a pleasant smile on their faces. But when they have to smile, some people really do not want to smile. But because of the professional requirements that come with their job, they often have to force a smile, which can sometimes make their expression look even worse or more uncomfortable. In the past, I met some flight attendants while traveling who were also Buddhists. She talked about their profession, mentioning that, generally speaking, as flight attendants working on planes, no matter how others scold them or speak to them, they consistently have to pretend to be especially gentle and cheerful, maintaining a positive attitude, and serve you in a certain way. But deep down, in truth, they really don't accept it. And if someone scolds her harshly, there's nothing else they can do at the time. But after returning in that person's teacup, they would put something unclean for him to consume. He would scold her harshly, saying, "Why is your attitude so bad?" On the surface, she wouldn't say anything to him at all, but after going back, she would be really angry too. Then, when she was about to pour him tea, she would put something unclean in it for him. Show him a very gentle and kind expression. Yet, if your heart has not been tamed, many of your outer actions and behaviors will still be influenced by your inner state, making it hard to truly act with kindness, no matter how you appear. Confucius also felt that this, in and of itself, had no real substantive meaning, so in certain specific aspects, whether in a modern society or in ancient times, he strongly believed it should be utilized and applied accordingly, depending on the circumstances. Between the mind and actions, in other words, there is some distance between the mind and actions, but the most important thing is the mind. If the mind is not pure, then the external world is also impure. Indeed, if our mind is relatively virtuous or good, this quality may not always be visible on the outside to those around us. There's a classic old story that people often tell. In a particular unnamed village, there lived a man who was unable to see, and this man had a peculiar habit of always carrying a lit lantern with him whenever he went out after dark. When many people were walking around outside, he himself would also often walk by carrying a lantern. Later, some people laughed at him Another person asked him, "Why, when you can't see with either eye, do you carry a lantern? You can't see anything yourself." "What's the reason for this?" he asked. He then said, "My heart is good. If I carry this lantern with me, maybe other people won't accidentally bump into me, and perhaps for them, relying on carrying this lantern, when they often go out at night, for example, it brings them some benefit." Later, this person thought, "It looks especially foolish for a blind person to carry a lantern. It seems really stupid. You don't even have eyes, yet you still carry a lantern. Other people who can see at night don't even carry lanterns. Your behavior looks especially ridiculous." But in fact, he genuinely had this kind of heart. It's actually quite difficult to balance this with one's outward behavior. There's also a saying like this: there was another person in a certain place. It seems like it might be very much the same as it is today. There was once a village where many new settlers came, and there was a certain old man who very often stood at the main crossroads, always asking these people the same simple question: "What exactly are you here for?" One person came over, and after coming over he said, "I'm here to settle down and make this place my home." He asked, "Why do you want to settle here?" He said, "In the village where I lived, none of the people were very good. The people here aren't good to me either, and I'm not good to them either. From what I see, the people in every village are all not very good. So I want to find the best village to live in, which is why I came here to settle down." The old man said, "Oh, our place here is exactly the same as your old village. Everyone here is not good either, so you'd better not stay here." Then another person came along. He said, "I'm here to settle down. Why? Because I had some issues over there. But I really truly miss my original village, because everyone in that village was very kind to me, and I was also very kind to them." Then the old man said, "Oh, everyone here is very good too. Just like in your old village. You can settle down here." So when you look at it, whether it's just a very ordinary story or simply a basic kind of language, everything seems very simple and easy to understand. In fact, that old man was experienced. Experienced in what? The first person, he certainly wasn't a good person, because in his eyes, the people around him were all part of a bad world. The other person, on the other hand, must have been a good person, because in his eyes, everyone was a good person. So he made the decision to stay here, to remain in this place. Finding people like this is beneficial for the whole village. This is something that some teachers in the past have also mentioned. I've heard it before. So from this story, you can see that some things from Confucius's era may perhaps seem these things are all very ordinary and very simple. But if we apply this principle further, perhaps in Buddhism as well, when it comes to spiritual practice, it can also be applied. Our mind is, as we all know, what truly matters. Our actions are not as important. If our mind is not good, then what's the point of that kind of behavior, no matter how you look at it? It doesn't really mean much, so honestly, it's not very significant. And below here, there's one more thing. Lin Fang asked about the essence of ritual. Confucius said, "That is indeed a great question. As for ritual, you know, it is certainly better to be frugal than extravagant. As for mourning, better to be deeply sorrowful than merely formal." There was someone named Lin Fang. Lin Fang was said to be a native of the state of Lu. However, in some explanations, it is said that in Confucius's writings, he doesn't appear often, just once or twice. But when he does actually appear, it's almost always related to matters of ritual, ceremony, and etiquette. He was probably an official in charge of enforcing the law, and Confucius addressed him directly by name, so his official rank was probably not very high. That's just the way Confucius referred to him. So as an official of the state of Lu, he respectfully asked a question about the ritual. He asked, what is the essence of ritual? Throughout his life, Confucius talked about ritual, sometimes this, sometimes that. The word ritual is frequent. When it comes to ritual and benevolence for them, actually even in our world today, ritual is very important. Nowadays there are even university lecturers who specialize in teaching international etiquette. There are, as we know, many such things internationally. For different countries, they have different forms of etiquette. It's very important for us to understand their etiquette. It's still very important. So including us, I used to talk about this in Tibetan for a while, but later I got tired and stopped. Otherwise, when eating, when talking after returning, shaking hands and so on, and also how to eat Western food, how to eat Chinese food in the right way, There are a lot of etiquette rules in general. This is from a relatively narrow perspective, speaking of etiquette nowadays, but the etiquette here may be more about, so at that particular moment, that person asked, what is the true essence of etiquette? What is the fundamental nature of etiquette? He was really curious and asked this question. Then Confucius said, now that is a great question. The question that you've just asked is a truly excellent one, and I must say it is also exceptionally meaningful. I've heard that in the past when some lecturers gave speeches, they would deliberately, on purpose, when others asked them questions, they would intentionally create an atmosphere. Wow, your question is very important. The question you asked is especially good. They themselves might not actually think it's that great, but in order to focus everyone's attention, they say, your question is very important. So everyone feels, wow, maybe it really is important, and everyone becomes focused. But that's not really the case with Confucius, is it? Looking at what we just read in the Ulumbana Sutra, the Buddha also said, the question you asked is very good. I am just thinking about how to answer you. So here he says, your question is significant. This is important. Then he answers, for ritual, rather than being extravagant, it is better to be frugal. He says that whenever we hold any kind of ceremony, if the ritual is, being performed, extravagant meaning luxurious and lavish, extremely lavish, grandiose, ostentatious and wasteful ceremonies, just like that, compared to ceremonies that are frugal, if you choose frugality. It means being more simple, economical and minimalist. That's better. What this means is that when it comes to the standards of our rituals, extravagance and wastefulness are not good. We should try our best not to waste, not to show off, even if you appear to be especially grand on the surface, making things bigger and bigger. In reality, you end up wasting a lot of resources. It's unnecessary. Sometimes in the summer season, or in particular, in order to achieve some kind of publicity or to reach a specific goal, it seems like a lot is wasted as well. But in such cases, it's not really that important. It's best to achieve your purpose, to act in a more economical way. Such behavior is very important. So generally speaking, Confucius, if we put it in today's terms, when it comes to organizing large-scale events, whether it's a wedding banquet or a funeral, should these be held in a solemn manner, or is it better to make them grand in scale? Or is it better to be a bit more economical, to keep the event more low-key? Confucius believed that the best approach is that as long as you achieve your purpose, it's better not to be extravagant and wasteful, but to be economical. Whatever people do, this aspect is still quite important as a reminder. The second question is, for example, after parents or relatives pass away, when holding funeral ceremonies for them, is it better to keep things simple and straightforward? Not making the appearance or outward form too grand or elaborate, so that the ceremony is fully, completely and absolutely completed and satisfactory. Is this better? Or should we, like Ningqi, let a quiet sense of sorrow gently emerge from within our hearts? For example, after parents or relatives pass away, everything may look especially solemn and grand on the surface, with all sorts of ceremonies. Like today in Han regions, drums are beaten, gongs struck, and people gather. Everyone gathers, so is this better? Or is it better to sincerely do some good deeds for your parents from the heart? Is this better? Or is it better to act from genuine heartfelt intention? Now, in some cities in Han regions, especially in the south, for example, in southern regions, they specifically hire professional mourners. So what are professional mourners? Because on the surface, whenever someone passes away, many people are expected to cry very intensely, but some people just can't cry. For those who can't cry, there are actually professionals specifically for this purpose who go around helping people to wail, grieve, and mourn. It seems that, as reported in the news or somewhere, within half a month, they might have gone to a dozen or even 20 different households. Some of them charge 600 yuan, while others charge 800 yuan. Some charge around 1,000 yuan. In front of others, perhaps on the surface, they keep crying loudly. And at that time, they even put some eye drops in their eyes so that real, genuine tears will actually begin to flow naturally. Then they kneel on the ground and cry out loud the whole time, especially for outsiders who see the scene. They have no idea who this person really is, but as long as someone in the family is crying, that's considered a good thing, because it shows great respect for the deceased. These are just some customs. Actually, what Confucius meant was that it's not really that important. What matters is that it comes from your heart, truly. Because these are just some outward forms we have, and there's a conflict with our emotions. When it comes to formality, they require it, but when it comes to emotion, it seems like it's not really there. Nowadays, in some cases, how should I put it, some people do cry out loud, but there are no tears at all, just ah, ah, ah. But basically, no real tears actually come out at all. Actually, there's a saying like this, not only in Tibet, but also in other places as well. There was a family, and everyone was crying loudly for the deceased. Everyone was wailing loudly. While they were crying, someone came to watch them. But he himself couldn't shed a single tear. Before dawn, he also pretended to cry loudly, but still he couldn't shed any tears. He really had no choice, and there was a bucket nearby. Actually, inside the bucket, there was some blood from a cow that had recently died. The blood was kept in there. He thought it was water. He continued slowly and carefully, dripping the blood from the bucket onto his eyes. When morning came, and it was light out, everyone saw, and some people noticed, that not only were there no tears in his eyes, but now even blood was slowly flowing out. There's also actually this kind of story, in fact. Maybe, according to Confucius' view, it is likely that, at that time, the actual form really wasn't all that important. Display wasn't important. So now, for example, last year and this year, memorial ceremonies for His Holiness's Parinirvana at the Academy, each year became grander than the last. There were more and more offerings and silks outside. But inside, there wasn't much going on. It seemed that in the end, it just became a formality. Later, the great masters at the Academy discussed together that every year we should sincerely recite His Holiness's ritual, the Vajrasattva ritual, and that the external display might be better kept modest. Whether it's offerings or anything else, we should try to keep things low-key. Because in today's society, as soon as something gets too extravagant, people can't stand it. Especially if it's mentioned online, people are generally not pleased about it. So whether it's for parents or for relatives or for the deceased, whatever you do, it's not about what you do on the surface or how much you add to it. That's not what's really important. Now, this happens both in Han regions and in Tibetan regions, including weddings and other celebrations. At these times, people focus on the external aspects for the sake of appearances, for how others see them, so that people think their family is impressive. How many cars they have, how much they own, what kind of hotel they've booked, and so on. But in fact, all these are just forms. And when form is combined with the heart, it's actually the heart that matters most. Whether it's for your teacher or for your parents, if you want to do something for them, like holding a memorial or commemorating them, if you do it sincerely from your heart, whether it's reciting scriptures or doing good deeds, that might actually be better. Otherwise, all the external packaging isn't really good. This includes some of our current festivals. There's such a significant amount of packaging. Take the Mid-Autumn Festival, for example, or with these kinds of gifts, there's actually very little that's edible or usable inside. But the outer packaging is especially big. And then at this point, they say how much it costs. Whether it's tea or wine, when people buy these things, in reality, we can't even tell what's inside. Is it really actually that expensive, though? The packaging on the outside looks great. And when they actually put a price tag on it, what does it really mean? I once saw this one particular tea merchant, and that year, the packaging for their tea was labeled as what they called 10-year-old tea. I went into that particular tea shop, and the person there started talking to me. While they talked, I overheard that this year's tea had a label on the outside saying 10-year-old ancient tea or something like that. So now, these kinds of labels, including any gifts we buy, the contents inside aren't necessarily genuine, but the label on the outside is really prominent. It says that it is a decades-old, very fine and rare wine, perhaps the sort that is described as being exclusively enjoyed by emperors. This ancient tree tea, they claim, exists only in Sri Lanka, and there's one tree. From this tree, they say it produces a tiny amount each year. And it's all packaged up like this. Now, other people can't buy it at all, but if they're selling it to you, it's 50,000 yuan. But today I have something urgent, so I'll sell it to you for 40,000. 49,999. There are a lot of things that are hard to talk about. So, relatively speaking, if you look at it, some Western customs, how should I put it, some of their rituals, although things used to be simpler and more straightforward, nowadays, even in many Western countries, you can see that some aspects are gradually becoming more and more inflated, with a sense of a bubble forming in different areas, which isn't ideal. This happens too. Moving on, I don't know how much time we have left today. Confucius once said, "The barbarians who have a ruler are still not as good as the Chinese states that are without one." Here, what this means is that the phrase Confucius said is simply referring to something that Confucius himself actually stated. And as for Yi and Di, it refers to the more remote and barbaric regions. These are called Yi and Di. Yi and Di having a ruler, Yi and Di are more remote, underdeveloped places. Or rather, these remote and somewhat barbaric areas still have kings or monarchs even in modern times. But they are not considered as prestigious as the Zhuxia, which refers to the Central Plains region. What we're talking about now is Huaxia culture. Back in those years, this place in the Central Plains wasn't quite like theirs. You know how to put it. When they say the king perishes, that last word, perishes, actually means nothing remains. So what does this mean? There may be several possible ways to interpret this. The first explanation is that in these remote and uncivilized regions there are rulers or kings, but their authority and civilization do not compare to those found in the Central Plains. In other words, while these distant lands do have their own monarchs, they are not as advanced or well governed as the rulers in the Central Plains areas of China, which is now considered more civilized. These places don't have monarchs. If there are no monarchs, actually, that's a very good thing. Some people interpret Confucius's meaning as such. It seems that if the remote outlying areas have monarchs, while our Central Plains region does not have a monarch, if you compare the two, our Central Plains region is actually a bit better. In all aspects, the level of civilization here is relatively higher. Although the barbaric and remote areas have monarchs, even if they have monarchs, it's still not as good as our Central Plains region. This is one way to interpret it. But many scholars believe that this interpretation doesn't seem correct. Because in Confucius' thinking, in his eyes, he treated the Central Plains and the remote regions with equal regard. He did not discriminate against us. Because originally, at that time, the state of Lu might have been relatively large, perhaps, and some other states were also considered relatively large. In that case, he would have called our state the best. Even if other regions had monarchs, they would not be equal to ours. But this may not be Confucius' actual thinking. If it were Confucius's thinking, it would seem Confucius had a certain arrogance toward his own state of Lu or toward the Central Plains region. He would look down on ethnic minorities and smaller states even if they had monarchs. They would be nowhere near as good as our region, put it this way. Then Confucius' thinking wouldn't really fit. So how does the other interpretation explain it? It says that these peripheral regions, the Yi and Di, if they have monarchs, they have a distinction between ruler and subject. They still have monarchs, and there is a clear and obvious difference. A ruler has the proper etiquette of a ruler, and a subject has the appropriate etiquette of a subject. But in the places where Huaxia culture exists, even the distinctions that exist in the peripheral regions, such as the separation between ruler and subject, are absent here. Here, between the monarchs and ministers of our dynasties, things are a bit chaotic. This kind of chaos, even the rules found in remote places, we don't have them here. So here it's completely a case of having the name, but not the reality. Even in those outside regions, there is a distinction between ruler and subject. They are polite, they have proper etiquette. But in our places, even though here should be the Central Plains of Huaxia, which is quite famous, and should have these rules, now, even here, things have already completely fallen apart. So Confucius himself instead used rather sharp language to rebuke some of the behaviors of the feudal states he lived in during that particular period in history had already declined. So here, it's mainly a comparison between culture and morality, or a dualistic contrast between civilization and barbarism. In the process of making this kind of comparison, he broke through his own original notions of what ethnicity he belonged to, or what kind of person he was. Confucius did not have such limitations. He believed that wherever there was truth, that place was suitable. whether it was a feudal state or the son of heaven himself. If someone makes a mistake, he will just point it out directly, so his comments tend to be rather sharp. Nowadays, many critics have a style that's quite similar. They don't hesitate to highlight what's wrong, and their remarks can sometimes sound harsh. However, criticism without reason alone is also certainly unreliable here, but the reasoning of Confucius is indeed quite sound and reasonable. Which country doesn't distinguish itself by whether it has a ruler or not, and by whether it values reason or not? In any country, sometimes whether it's the nation or the people, no one upholds reason at all. If no one values reason, then what use is status? What use is wealth ultimately? If true principles have already been lost, then nothing really matters. Even having power is of no use. Even your dignified and seemingly impressive appearance, all of these things are in the end useless. If you truly uphold the truth, then even in remote places it exists. And in prosperous, flourishing lands it exists as well. So, at a certain point in our individual lives, what is the one fundamental truth that shines as brightly as pure gold in this world? The answer, quite simply, is sincerity. So no matter where you are, if there is no distinction between ruler and subject, no distinction between teacher and disciple, and everything is all mixed together, then it would no longer be a human world. Because as humans, sometimes when we are cunning, we can be even more formidable than other beings. Take animals, for example, like cats or wolves. They are quite skilled at killing other living beings themselves. They have some expertise when it comes to destroying life, but in other aspects, they are not really very capable. For example, take cats. They only use various techniques when killing, such as being silent and employing all sorts of tricks. Even their demeanor appears gentle and calm. They present themselves in this way. But in other respects, they simply can't use cunning behavior to deceive others. But if we humans lack proper education, if our hearts are not set right, then indeed in many areas, whether it's killing or stealing, in many ways humans are the most formidable when it comes to doing bad things. So if a person is good sometimes, within our Tathagata-garbha, there are boundless and infinite virtues. I think many of these can be discovered and brought out. They can also be used in this life and the next. But if things go wrong, and one relies on wrong views to develop the other side, humans can also be very cunning. So here, Confucius was addressing the society of his time, as well as people in our world today. This is also a remarkably subtle analysis of the complex human mind. He observed that among people, some are very genuine. The true intention of Confucius was that he especially liked people who are genuine. Even if you are a bit slow, it doesn't matter. A genuine person will have a promising future. Nowadays, many university professors and teachers, when analyzing their own students, they don't necessarily think that having a high IQ is the most important thing. In some universities, many of the top-ranking students, those who score exceptionally well, in fact, some of them actually end up eventually turning to a life of crime later on. But for those who are truly more sincere, even if their grades weren't very high back then, they often go on to accomplish great success in whatever they do. So whether it's Confucian thought or Buddhist philosophy, such as having a sincere heart is very important. In the past, my revered teacher also used to say, mind kind, actions follow Dharma. This is extremely important. Throughout his entire life, when it comes to it, both the mind and one's actions, having a kind heart and virtuous behavior, these are very important. This is the core of Confucius philosophy. I'm not sure how long we've talked, but that's it for now. I'll stop here.
Jupun Sonen Droa Bandangara Badna Asadordo Bandangara Badna Asadordo Bandangara Badna Asadordo